Welcome back. We're going to do a perspective study of 3 stacked cubes today. And we are going to start by sort of blocking in, make sure that this fits on the page. So I'm going to block where the bottom cube sits. And obviously these cubes all have to be about the same size. And second cube and the third cube. Let me see if I can. Okay. So I'm going to draw these a little bigger than they appear on the screen. I'm just doing a little planning, and I'm going to go right in. I'm going to start with the vertical edge of the bottom cube. At this point, we're looking to estimate angles. As you know, we sometimes use angle measuring tools in this class. We are going to I don't think so. So we're going to start by looking at these angles. Why can't I make this a straight line? There it is. So I'm going to imagine, well, you don't have to imagine it because I'm going to draw it. This is what I always do. I imagine a baseline, and I look at this angle and this angle. And I would say this angle is about a little more than 30 degrees, maybe 35, and this is a little less than 30 degrees. This is about 25. And you should be familiar with a 30-degree angle from all the work that we've done with isometric perspective. So we're going to try to draw these angles as we see them. This one, make sure this one is smaller. Make sure this one is bigger, but it's not 45 degrees. Remember, 45 would be up here. This is a little lower than that. Like I said, I'm guessing about 35 degrees. Okay, now we're going to use a little bit of brain power. We know, because this is slightly foreshortened, that this distance has to be a little less than this one. So I'm gonna draw it by eye, and then I'm gonna check my work with some scrap paper and just make sure I didn't make it too long. So I'm gonna measure that, and you see that's a little bit shorter. That's what I would expect. And it's not cheating, it's just anything we can do to be more accurate is okay. Now you'll notice our eye level is near the top of the screen. So that means these are converging, and where they meet would be way off the page. It's going to be eye level is up around here somewhere. So it's hard to aim for a vanishing point that's that far off the screen. Might be more useful to just look at this angle, which is definitely smaller than this one, right? If this is 25, this one's maybe 20. So I'm just going to draw a slightly smaller angle up here, and that will create some convergence as we go this way. And we can check work again. Remember, we checked this height. This height has to be a little bit less, right? Because this is further away. It's not a lot less because this is largely facing us, but it has to be a little bit less. My next step is going to be to visually measure across here. This is a distance I already determined. This is one that I have not yet determined. And I want to think about the fractional relationship between those two distances. And I would say that this distance is definitely more than half of this distance. It's probably about 3/5. It's not quite 2/3. It's definitely more than half. So I'm going to estimate that would be a half. And then I'm just going to cheat in a little extra. And a fraction like 3/5 is not one that you're probably used to talking to yourself about, but it's good to get better at seeing fractions like that. It's a very valuable skill. And then this is going to be slightly lower angle than this one. And these lines here and here have to converge. So that means this angle is even lower than this one. And that does it for my first cube. That we can't see the rest of it. My next step is going to be to find this vertical edge. And you'll notice that this is about a third of the way across this surface. Might be a little more than a third. So that puts us right about here for the next vertical edge. Maybe a little more to the left. And this corner does not come down as far as this corner, which makes me think I maybe have that corner a little too high. This has to end up here somewhere. And this is almost horizontal. This just rises a few degrees. And it hangs out past this edge. You see how this is almost horizontal, just slight tilt upward. I can show you here. It's just a few degrees up. I probably need to bring mine up a little more. We've been doing a lot with vanishing points. Today we're sort of just learning how to eyeball it. And this is the kind of work that you do, and then you later check it with your vanishing point. Okay, because this edge here is virtually the same height as this one, I can take out my scrap paper again, and I just can measure this and make sure they end up being the same. I probably should have drawn it first and guessed and then checked my work. That's the habit I encourage in you, but I just cheated a little. And let me clean some of this up. So let me get rid of these. Okay, so now we're trying to, we've drawn this line, and we're trying to find this angle. So can everyone see about what that angle is? Anyone want to shout it out?
30, 45.
It's very close to a 45. Yeah, if anything, it might be a degree or two less than 45. I don't think it's 50. I think it's really close to 45, which just means that this space here and this space are about the same. So try to draw yourself a 45-degree angle. Now we've created a negative shape here. You can check the shape of that triangle to make sure it's about right. We can see that this corner is just a little bit past this overlap. So that's where this vertical happens. And this is going to be converging slightly with this one, but the rest of this face is hidden. And now we're going to draw this one, which converges. Does everyone understand? These converge, but because they're so close to horizontal, they're gonna hit eye level at like a mile away. Not literally a mile, but they're hitting eye level very, very far away, and that's why they converge so slowly. So you can essentially make this the same angle as this. The convergence is so minimal that it's not going to make a huge difference. And then this should virtually be the same as this. And that gets us where we want to be with just hanging out a little bit past this corner. And this converges with these two. I'm going to just bring this in a little bit because it is just a tiny bit foreshortened, and I think I need to do that. Yeah, that's better. Okay. That brings us to our top block. So we found this one and we found this one. Notice that if we extend this one, we end up almost exactly centered between the first two verticals. So we can pull up a vertical through this gap, and that's where our last vertical is going to sit. And we see just a little bit of this corner here. And if we want to look at this angle we're trying to draw now, it is probably about 10 degrees or smaller. So if you know what that looks like, it's, you know, about a third of a 30-degree triangle. And this is going up just a little more than that, maybe 12 degrees. And the reason we know that these two angles here and here are not exactly the same is because this corner and this corner are not aligned together. You see how there's a little jump from here to here? That means that the cube is rotating towards us a little bit to the right. So this angle is going to be, like I said, about 12 degrees. And interestingly, this corner lines up exactly with this edge. And I'm going to estimate my height, try to make it the same as these other heights, and then I'm going to check it with my scrap paper, make sure it is indeed the same as all the other heights. And if this is 10 degrees, this is going to be about 8. This is going to be definitely lower. And we already found how far the bottom cube sticks out. Notice this cube sticks out just a little farther, so we can make it easy finding this foreshortened distance by comparing it to one of our previously determined foreshortened distances. Okay, now we're going to do this angle is getting very shallow here. Okay, I feel like I made this a little too long, so I'm going to just bring that in a little. And you see that angle I found across the corners? I'm going to actually sketch that in. And then I'm going to bring this across, bearing in mind that this has to converge with this, and this has to converge with this. And then I'm going to erase some of the hidden and construction lines. And that's our finished perspective construction of this assembly. So we're going to proceed to shadow map this now. Let me get rid of all my markings. And we're going to draw this little triangle of shadow. Use a light touch when you're shadow mapping, please. And we've got a little triangle under here. And a triangle under here. And pay attention to what's happening here. Notice this, here's the orthogonal, and then this goes up. So this doesn't follow the orthogonal. It goes about 10 degrees higher than the orthogonal. It would be helpful to put this line in. This line slopes slightly up towards the left. That's where the floor meets the wall. And then we've got this business. And this goes about straight up. And then to here. There we go. Okay, now we're going to start using charcoal. You know what? Let's just finish. Let's not use charcoal today. Let's just use the graphite pencils. Because the charcoal we're working on construction paper today, and I didn't really like how the charcoal felt on it. So if you want to try charcoal, go ahead, but I'm going to keep going with my number 2 pencil. And the thing I want you to think about for a second is ask yourself, is is this surface in shadow? Does anyone have an opinion? You think it is in shadow? Yeah, that's a halftone. That's not really quite a shadow. And you could test it if this were a real thing, you could test it. If I held a pencil in front of this surface, would the pencil cast a shadow onto it? It would. That means it's receiving light. Okay, you can always test an area to see if it's receiving light. What about this surface? Is this in shadow? Yes. So when we do our first shading, and remember, I'm left-handed. If you're right-handed, you're going to be shading the other way. We're going to leave this alone for now. Another refresher on first shading is we don't shade up to this edge and then start again over here. We just shade right across this boundary because these surfaces are both in shadow, and so we want to lay a tone over this whole area. Again, this is lefty first shading. Right-handed people are going the other direction, please. Halftones are areas in light that are falling at an angle away from the light, so they're not receiving it fully, but they are receiving it directly. And one more piece of shadow over here. Some people have a hard time making long shading lines. You don't really need to. Some artists like to just do short lines like this, and then they just go do several passes. Our goal here, though, is to create a nice solid tone. Okay, now because we're using white, we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to basically go back and erase wherever I have two planes that meet that are both in light. So I'm going to leave it so I can very faintly see my line, but I want to get rid of most of my dark graphite wherever light is meeting light, because those planes are going to be defined not by dark lines but by highlights. And I can go right back in and I can put these back in with white. If I zoom in on this, you might be able to see better what I'm talking about. Wherever two planes that are both in light meet, you usually see a little intensification of the light along that edge. So that's what we're representing right now. And if you leave your black line there, it'll really interfere with your effect. And you also don't want to try to make a white line on top of a black line because they'll just blend together. So we're going to make this a white line, and I'm even going to hatch across that line a little bit to round it slightly. This is going to be a white edge. This is a white edge. And these down here are white edges. Oh, and there's one last one over here. So our drawings just got like 10 times more sophisticated. As soon as you get rid of the dark outlines on your illuminated plane changes, you see how much more solid that looks? Now those plane changes really stick out, whereas before they were sinking back. I forgot to do first shading on this little piece of shadow right here. And now we're going to do first shading in white, which we've never done before. And that's just using your first shading direction on all the planes that face upward. So these planes, this little piece here, and this plane here, and the entire ground plane is also going to be first shaded in white. We're just doing a study today, not a composition, so you don't need to shade all the way to the edge of your paper. We're just throwing in some light around here to define this area, like that. So you can see we have already achieved like a much richer and value, a much better range of values in less time than we ever would have been able to do with on white paper. And we are about to start second shading. If you're falling behind, just do what I'm doing. You can go back and I will help you get caught up in other areas. But we can see that on the wall, the shadow is much deeper than it is on the cubes. And because I need to sharpen this edge and because it's a vertical wall, I'm going to start with a vertical shading direction here. That just makes sense. And notice I'm going right up to these edges. And when I get to here, this is one of our only really soft edges. So I'm going to lighten my shadow map a little. And I'm going to shade right up slightly over this edge, because I need this to bleed into the surrounding wall. And we are not smudging. Smudging does not translate well into pen drawing or printmaking or other media that we might like to learn to use someday, so we're strictly learning a hatching technique in this class. No smudging is going to be allowed. The other direction that might make sense on this wall is an orthogonal direction. So it's not exactly horizontal because this horizon line tilts a little, but it would be appropriate to shade the wall in an orthogonal direction. So I'm following this orthogonal, and as I get up closer to eye level, my lines are actually going to get slightly more horizontal. So we're going to end up with this nice jaggedy soft edge along here. On the floor, we're going to mainly use orthogonal shading. And we're going to get this edge slightly out of focus. And we're not going to get, we're going to leave this a little darker here than the floor. And I'm just going to go back and do a little bit of vertical shading to reinforce this edge. The beauty of these rectilinear objects is really all in the sharpness of the edges. So that's what we're focusing on. Wherever edges, wherever surfaces meet, we want to be sure that we get a nice crisp, sharp edges. If these look at all blurry or out of focus, it's going to be a very unsatisfying effect. And a little refresher for sharpening an edge, you have to shade with the direction of the edge. So when we see a razor sharp edge like this, in the drawing, what we want to do is some vertical shading, because that's what's going to sharpen this edge. I'm not outlining it, I'm just bringing these vertical shading lines right up to it and creating the necessary degree of sharpness. And I'm going to go down from here a little bit. And I want to darken this side, but I don't want it to compete with my shadow on the wall. That's still going to be our darkest values. So a lot of our teachers tell you there are no outlines in nature. Has anyone ever heard that before? Okay, well, I used to hear it. What there are in nature, though, are small, tiny cast shadows. So where this block meets the block it's sitting on, we can put a line, because that's what I see there. This is just a really skinny cast shadow, and that's the only place in the drawing where you see a very clear, sharp outline. There's another little one up here, and there might be one down where down here where this block meets the ground. So in Intro to Drawing, remember, we learned how to use lines to represent plane changes. This is not a plane change. This is a cast shadow. So if I want to be really fussy about it, and I am sometimes, I could, let's get rid of the red. I can put this line in, and then if it's not reading as a shadow, watch what I can do. I can hatch away from it to the left. These tiny little lines to just fuzz it out a little bit on the left-hand side, and you see what that does? It starts to read more as what it is, which is a little cast shadow. We've got the same thing happening over here. We've got this very crisp little outline, and I can blur it a little bit to the right this time. And I'm also going to blur these shadows a little bit, these shadow edges, with a little bit of vertical shading going straight down like this and like this. And I'm going to do the same thing up here. This gets really dark and a little bit blurred along the bottom edge, so kind of like that. And another thin really thin cast shadow right along here. Now technically, this is a light surface and this is also in full light. So my drawing could be more realistic if I at least lighten these outlines or even get rid of them completely. Those are really competing with the illusion that I'm trying to create. Anytime light meets light, you don't want to have a dark line. But there is something symbolic about any drawing, and some people like to have some outlines. As long as it looks like you are doing that on purpose, it's fine. But the way this edge is going to be brought out is by the halftones. And it's time for us to make a decision. You see, we've already achieved like a really convincing effect with very little work because we're using this gray paper. We're exploiting the gray paper as much as we can. At this point, though, we need to make a decision, like, because in the motif, obviously, these two planes are different, and this plane is different from either one of them. Do you see what I mean? Like, I'm going to zoom in so you can see it very clearly. We have 3 separate values here that are all in light, correct? On the paper, they're all the same because so far all we've used for all 3 of them is the gray paper. What we want to do now is decide which of those 3 is going to represent, which one of those is closest to the actual value of our paper. What do you think? This one, 2, or 3, which one's closest to the value of the paper? Yeah, I would agree. This is probably the value of the paper. This paper is kind of light. So that means we can actually shade the paper down a little bit in the halftones. When we use a darker gray paper, we're not going to touch our halftones with black, but today we're going to because this is very light paper. So the goal here is we do not want this shading to compete with our actual shadows. And we don't need to do a first shading because we're not doing a shadow. So what we want to do is just use our second shading directions, which are going to be vertical and orthogonal, and just very lightly shade this edge, this surface down. So that's my vertical direction, and then I'm going to use an orthogonal direction to sharpen this edge. And the vertical direction to sharpen this edge. If you stick with the natural shading directions, you're always going to be able to sharpen your edges. See, this edge gets sharper with the vertical shading. This gets sharper with orthogonal shading. But nothing here is anywhere near as dark as this whole surface. And what do you do if you get too dark by accident? That's when you use your kneaded eraser. Just press the eraser down and you can lift off a little bit of your shading without erasing and starting over. So now I've distinguished my darkest halftone. And I would say I need a similar amount of shading on this surface down here. So again, very light touch, vertical and orthogonal shading. Vertical and orthogonal. And we agreed that this was going to be our paper value, so that means we also have a little work to do to shade the background. We're barely going to touch it, but we're going to be shading vertically. Very, very lightly. Remember, we're trying to stay lighter than this surface. This is where something I stress in intro, just that need for dynamic control where you can you learn not to press hard. You learn to have a range of pressures that you use becomes really important because we are barely touching the paper right now. And I'm going to again use my vertical and orthogonal shading directions. Okay, I just went a little too dark here, so I'm going to use my kneaded eraser. I can see this needs to be just a little darker. I'm working on bringing this edge out a little more clearly. And when you're drawing straight edges, another trick is, let's say I'm going to put this back in a little too dark. So you see I'm starting to lose that edge. What I can do is use a piece of scrap paper. Anything will work. And I can put that paper along the edge, and I can use the kneaded eraser and erase just one side of the edge. That's going to give me a nice crisp, sharp edge along there. And that's something that you can use anywhere. I'm going to give you a little time to catch up. I'm for fun, I'm going to hatch in a little bit of this wood grain detail. Notice I'm trying to show that this is a curved out form, so instead of using vertical strokes, I'm just making these little hatching strokes. And I'm going to go just a little darker in here. Now, one medium that is compatible with graphite, which is what we're using, is something called a Wolf's Carbon Pencil. And I'm going to pause while I go get one. So it's usually a bad idea to introduce charcoal into a graphite drawing, but this Wolf's Carbon Pencil is a blend of graphite and carbon, and see, the problem is I'm trying to shade on top of graphite, and the graphite is really slippery. And this paper is pretty cheap, so it's not making a huge difference. But I am able to get a little bit more punch into my darks this way. And if you would like to try that, I can hook you up with one of these. This would work a lot better on a higher quality of paper. Your final touches should really be focused on making those sharp edges pop. So I'm going a little darker behind here. And then I'm going to sharpen my white pencil. And I'm going to go a little brighter along here. This is where I'm going to press really pretty hard. It can be hard, especially on cheap paper, to get punch those highlights bright enough. When I was trying to make a living as a portrait artist in Paris, a sidewalk artist, one of the other artists showed me how you could get a brighter highlight by just getting the tip of the pencil wet in your mouth, and then I'm going to do that. Sorry to gross you out, but so I'm going to just lick the end of the pencil and then put this little highlight in. And you see how that, like, it gets a little brighter if you do that? So, and these are not toxic pencils, so if you want to try that, feel free. So the portrait artist would always do that for the little highlight on the eyeball. Okay, that's going to do it for today's video. Thanks everyone at home for watching. I hope it was useful. Remember to smash that like and subscribe button. See you next time.